When we think about the law, we usually expect a certain level of, well, basically Newtonian physics, right?
Right.
Cause and effect.
Observable actions.
Exactly. Like you drop an apple, it falls. You break a window, there is shattered glass on the floor, and someone points to it and says, there's the damage.
Yeah, measurable consequences. Because the law is meant to be tangible, right?
Yeah.
It relies on this chain of physical evidence.
It does. And it's comforting, to be honest. But then you step into the world of digital speech and this really vague legal concept of public order. And suddenly, that cause and effect relationship gets entirely disconnected from reality.
Completely disconnected.
You stop looking for shattered glass and start prosecuting the wind.
Which becomes, the absolute definition of a legal black hole. When the damage is invisible, the rules for proving it they seem to evaporate entirely.
They really do. And as you listen to this today, on Monday, August 10th, 2026, you might think a system like that could never quantify something as abstract as, like, a retweet.
Right, you'd think so.
But today, our mission is to dive into a stack of incredibly unique sources. We've got legal indictments, court verdicts, AI-generated meta-analyses, and a really remarkable document known as a prison blood letter.
Yeah, that letter is just incredible.
It really is. And all of this shows exactly what happens when the law tries to punish digital error. We're looking at a defendant named Dr. Chen Jingyuan, who was charged with a crime for retweeting a few posts. But his defense is what makes this completely wild.
What's fascinating here is that we are analyzing his defense purely through the lens of these provided documents.
Right, just the text.
Exactly. We are remaining entirely impartial about the political context or the overarching systems at play here. Our focus is strictly on the brilliant, cross-disciplinary strategy used by Dr. Chen to fight his case.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I want to get the baseline facts of this case straight first. I really need to understand how a scholar ends up sitting in a prison cell writing a defense letter in his own blood.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie, but it's all in the files.
So who exactly is Dr. Chen, and what did he actually do?
Well, according to the case files we have, Dr. Chen is a scholar born in 1976, and he was arrested in Kunming, China.
Okay.
His alleged crime was simply retweeting Twitter posts. These weren't calls to violence or massive organizing efforts or anything like that.
Just normal.
Just normal posts. The documents say they included art, some historical commentary, and statements directly from the U.S. Embassy.
Wow. Okay, so not exactly a revolutionary manifesto?
Well, not at all. But the charge leveled against him was a statute known as picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Oh, right. I've seen that term in the documents. It's usually abbreviated in the literature as PXQT, right?
Exactly, PXQT.
Yeah.
And the sources highlight what they call this constitutional dual track.
Right, the dual track.
Yeah.
Because on paper, you have these very solemn formal rights, like Article 35 guarantees freedom of speech and Article 47 protects academic freedom.
Yes, that's the theory.
But in practice, you have this pocket crime of PXQT just waiting there.
That's right. A pocket crime is basically a legal term for a statute that is so broadly defined with such vague parameters that almost any behavior the authorities just, dislike can be dropped right into its pocket.
So it's designed for selective enforcement.
Exactly. It's a catch-all.
And the prosecution's specific claim was that Dr. Chen intentionally spread false information, which caused severe public disorder.
That was the official charge.
But wait, if the law explicitly requires proof of severe public disorder, how did the prosecution quantify that disorder without any data? Did they point to a riot? Did traffic stop in Kunming? Was there a run on the banks?
They pointed to absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. In philosophy and linguistics, there is a concept called referential failure.
Referential failure. I don't think I know that one.
Well, think of it like pointing your finger at a chair that isn't there and saying, look at that chair.
Okay, I see.
The sentence makes grammatical sense, right? But it fails to refer to anything in actual reality. It's an empty assertion. So the indictment claimed severe public disorder, but pointed to zero empirical evidence. There was no mass panic, no group events, no data on his retweets going viral at all.
So it highlights this massive tension between abstract political rhetoric and the precise terminology the law is supposed to require.
Exactly.
That just feels incredibly frustrating. Like, you can't defend yourself against a ghost. And the documents also mentioned that the prosecutor, Bin, allegedly admitted in court that he hadn't actually verified if the retweeted information was false.
He admitted that.
And he didn't even plan to.
Correct. So to bridge the gap between their complete lack of evidence and his supposed guilt, the court used a logical fallacy. The sources call it guilt by status.
Guilt by status.
Yeah, they essentially argued that because Dr. Chen has a high level of education, he, quote, must have known the posts were false.
Oh, come on.
And therefore he had malicious intent. They basically substituted his demographic profile for actual proof of a crime.
So the legal system is relying entirely on empty assertions of chaos. If I'm Dr. Chen, sitting in a cell, how do I argue legal theory with a court that literally refuses to use legal evidence?
Well, you don't. And that is where Dr. Chen's genius really comes in.
Right.
He realizes the legal framework is a total dead end. So he pivots. He decides he has to mathematically prove that his actions could not have caused chaos.
He moves his defense from the courtroom to the laws of thermodynamics and network physics.
Yes.
This is the part of the deep dive that really blew my mind. He starts using network science to map out his exact place on the internet. But I need some help visualizing this, to be honest. The sources mention he used the concept of scale-free networks. What does that actually look like?
Okay, so a scale-free network is a specific type of structure, and the internet, including Twitter, is the perfect example of it.
Okay.
Imagine a map of airline flights. You have a few massive hubs like Atlanta or JFK with, thousands of connections a day. Those are the supernodes. Then you have millions of tiny regional airports with maybe 1 or 2 flights a day. Those are the edge nodes or peripheral nodes.
Okay, that makes sense. So like a celebrity with 10 million followers is a supernode.
Exactly.
And Dr. Chen is a tiny regional airport.
Yes. Dr. Chen points out that he had fewer than 100 followers, and the documents say most of those were likely automated bots. Plus, he had virtually zero interaction on his posts.
Right.
So he establishes his location in the physics of the network. He is on the extreme periphery.
Okay, but I have to push back here, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm playing devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Even if he only has 100 followers, and they are mostly bots,
Yeah.
couldn't one of those bots randomly amplify his retweet to 1 million people? Or couldn't a bigger account just stumble on his tiny account and blast it out? Like, how can physics rule out a viral fluke entirely?
That is the exact question the prosecution should have asked, and physics actually has a definitive answer for it. Yeah. To explain why that viral fluke is mathematically impossible in his specific case, Dr. Chen introduces Cohen's critical threshold formula from percolation theory.
Percolation theory, like making coffee.
Actually, yes, it's a great analogy.
Oh, sweet.
Think of percolation theory like pouring water over coffee grounds. If the grounds are packed too loosely, the water just drips straight through.
Right, it doesn't extract anything.
Exactly. It doesn't pool up, it doesn't build pressure, and you don't get an overflow. In network science, information flows the exact same way. For a post to go viral and reach a larger hub, the surrounding nodes need a specific density of engagement to pass the information along.
So because his network was so loose and unconnected, the information just drips straight through to nowhere.
Exactly. Cohen's formula mathematically proves that in a scale-free network, removing or altering an edge node, like Dr. Chen's tiny account, has absolutely zero macroscopic effect on the system.
Zero.
Zero. You could wipe out thousands of these tiny nodes, and the overarching structure of the network doesn't even feel a tremor. The water never reaches the hubs.
But the court is claiming he caused an avalanche of public disorder.
Right, which brings us to the next physical concept he uses, which is the branching process, specifically relying on the Galton-Watson theorem.
Oh, I saw that in the notes. The branching factor, represented by the letter M.
Yes, M. So M measures how many new people share a post for every one person who sees it.
Right.
If I share a post and 2 of my friends share it and 4 of their friends share it, the branching factor is greater than 1. That is how an avalanche happens. That is how a post goes viral.
Because it's exponential growth.
Exactly. But Dr. Chen proved that because he had no engagement, his account's branching factor was drastically less than 1.
Okay.
In physics, when your branching factor is that low, you are operating in what is called a deep subcritical zone.
A deep subcritical zone, meaning there is literally not enough energy to cause a reaction.
Precisely. For a systemic avalanche to occur, or in the court's words, severe public disorder, the network must be in a supercritical state. By proving his branching factor was near zero, Dr. Chen demonstrated that a public panic stemming from his retweet wasn't just unlikely. According to the math, it was an impossible event.
So the prosecution is essentially confusing a microfluctuation like a single retweet by a tiny account with a macroscopic phase transition, which would be actual societal chaos.
That's the core of his argument.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because to put it in a way anyone could understand, Chen basically compared his retweets to a single person breathing out carbon dioxide and the court blaming that one person's breath for causing global warming.
It's an incredible analogy.
Right. Because breathing does produce carbon dioxide, technically, just like retweeting does put information on the internet. But attributing global climate change to one single breath is scientifically absurd.
It is entirely absurd. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what Chen is doing here is executing a masterful inversion of the burden of proof. By bringing in statistical physics, he isn't just sitting there saying, I didn't do it. He is demanding that the court scientifically prove the network was already in a supercritical state, and that his specific microfluctuation was the exact trigger that caused the phase transition.
He is demanding they show their math.
He is.
But of course, they don't have any math.
No, none.
The math is bulletproof. He basically trapped them in an airtight box of logic. So if the math is that flawless, how does a judge look at that and still say guilty? I mean, what is going on in the minds of the people running this trial?
That is the pivotal question here. Because when rigorous, undeniable science is rejected by a system, the answers aren't in physics anymore.
Right.
The sources suggest we have to look at the psychological framing of the people receiving the logic.
We have to look at how they process reality.
Exactly. And the documents use developmental psychology to explain this clash. Think about how humans develop their sense of morality. Dr. Chen is operating at what psychologists call post-formal thought. In Lawrence Kohlberg's famous stages of moral development, Chen has reached the highest stage, which is universal ethical principles.
Meaning he cares more about objective truth than what society thinks of him.
Yes. He is driven by internal convictions about truth, logic, and human rights. He isn't acting to gain external rewards or avoid punishments.
Interesting.
We also see this through Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Chen is in a phase of achieving generativity.
Generativity, like generating something new.
Exactly. It's the human desire to create things that will outlast you.
Yeah.
To contribute to the future.
Right.
Even while locked in a cell facing immense pressure, his impulse is to turn his trauma into a historical document. His blood letter for future generations to learn from. He is generating knowledge.
But the judges and the prosecutors, they clearly aren't looking to generate knowledge for the future.
No, they aren't. The psychological analysis in our sources suggests the judicial personnel are operating at a much earlier stage called conventional morality.
Conventional morality.
Yeah, this stage is all about rigidly following rules, conforming to social order, and maintaining authority.
So they aren't looking for universal truth. They're just looking to close a case file and, follow orders.
Precisely. And to cope with the intense systemic pressure of their jobs, processing people through a rigid, sometimes unfair bureaucracy, they exhibit emotional numbness as a defense mechanism.
Wow.
They shut off their empathy and their critical thinking just to get through the day.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You can't process a mathematically flawless defense if your brain is in survival mode, just trying to conform to the system.
Right.
The sources also mention personality psychology here, right? Like the big 5 traits.
They do, and it provides a fascinating contrast. In the Big 5 personality model, Dr. Chen exhibits extremely high openness.
Okay.
This is a trait characterized by a deep desire to explore diverse ideas, abstract concepts, and different perspectives.
Which perfectly explains why he was curating a timeline of global art and foreign embassy statements to begin with.
Yes, exactly. He also shows incredibly high conscientiousness, which we see in his meticulous, structured, scientifically rigorous drafting of his defense while he was in prison.
Okay, so that's Chen. But if we look at the judicial system as a collective entity.
The system exhibits the exact opposite, extremely low openness.
So they hate ambiguity.
Exactly. Low openness means you abhor ambiguity. You anchor immediately to preset labels to make sense of the world. They see a highly educated man retweeting something politically sensitive, and they instantly apply a rigid label.
Like we said earlier, high education plus foreign retweet equals malicious intent.
Yes.
No investigation required.
Exactly. And at the same time, the system displays high conscientiousness, but in a very different way than Chen does.
Oh, so?
Their conscientiousness is focused purely on the rigid, inflexible enforcement of order, regardless of the underlying facts.
What does this all mean for you and me? It sounds like they aren't just punishing a crime, they're literally punishing a personality-type curiosity itself.
That's a great point. Which brings us to a core concept in behavioral psychology. Curating information and seeking knowledge isn't just a hobby for a scholar. It is a highly stable, intrinsically reinforced behavior. It's an adaptive human instinct.
That's how we survive. We learn things.
Exactly. But the state attempted to extinguish this natural behavior using harsh conditioning. In behavioral terms, they applied positive punishment, meaning adding aversive stimuli like imprisonment and interrogation,
Right.
and negative punishment removing positive stimuli like his freedom and his connection to his family.
But if they apply enough punishment, shouldn't his behavior theoretically extinguish? Shouldn't he just give up and sign a confession to make the pain stop?
That is the state's gamble, right?
Yeah.
But behavioral psychology tells us that attempting to forcefully extinguish a highly adaptive, intrinsic human behavior often backfires.
Really?
Yeah. When you apply extreme pressure to a mind that operates on universal principles, it doesn't extinguish the intellect. It often generates immense psychological resilience.
Wow. It forged his intellect into a sharper weapon, which is the perfect way to describe the final and, frankly, most incredible part of this story. Because Dr. Chen didn't just sit there and analyze his own mind.
No, he didn't.
He used these exact same psychological and physical frameworks to put his captors on trial.
He did. His prison blood letter completely flips the script on the authorities.
Yeah.
Based on the documentation we have, he formally accuses the judicial personnel, who he basically calls a judicial mafia, of illegal detention, extracting confessions by torture, abusing their power, and bending the law to fit their narrative.
And again, as a reminder to you listening, we are neutrally reporting Dr. Chen's claims exactly as they are documented in our sources.
Right, exactly.
But his legal argument here is a masterclass in irony.
It's stunning. He points out that the actions of the authorities, forcing their way into his home without proper warrants, failing to notify his family of his location, holding closed-door trials, those actions actually fit the legal definition of picking quarrels and provoking trouble far better than his retweets ever did.
It's like judicial judo. He takes their own vague legal charges and the laws of physics and just redirects the momentum right back at them.
That's a great way to put it.
But he doesn't stop with the law, does he? He actually applies the network physics back to the state, too.
Yes, and this is where all the concepts really tie together. Remember the supernodes we talked about earlier? The massive hubs with all the power and connections?
Right, like the huge airline hubs, Atlanta, JFK.
Right. Chen argues that the state and its judicial system act as the true supernode in the societal network. They have all the power, the reach, and the authority.
Okay, I follow.
When an edge node like Chen sends a tweet, it drips through the coffee grounds and vanishes. But when a supernode systematically bends the law, fabricates evidence, and operates in secret, they're the ones introducing massive, explosive instability into the entire societal network.
Oh, wow. So by systematically abandoning the rule of law, the state is the one pushing the entire system toward a dangerous supercritical state. They're the ones creating the conditions for a true avalanche, while blaming a single snowflake for the weather.
Precisely. This raises an important question, though, and he is illustrating a profound tension between formalistic law and substantive justice.
Formalistic law versus substantive justice.
Yeah. Formalistic law is just following the rules on paper, checking the boxes. Substantive justice is about actual truth and fairness.
Right.
Chen argues that when a supernode system abandons evidence-based reality and relies purely on authority to dictate truth, it inherently erodes its own legitimacy. It makes the whole network unstable.
And what's amazing is that he actually gets his final empirical proof of this after the trial is over, right?
He does, because reality always gets the last word.
Always.
After his release, Chen notes a fascinating detail. His Twitter account and all of the posts that supposedly caused this severe public disorder had remained online the entire time he was in prison.
Wait, really? The state didn't even bother to take them down?
No, they didn't. And guess what? They still had zero impact. Nobody noticed them. No riots happened. The network didn't collapse.
Unbelievable.
It served as a perfect natural control experiment, proving definitively that the state's initial panic about severe public disorder was entirely fabricated.
It's the ultimate application of the scientific method to a legal injustice. He formulated a hypothesis in his cell, he survived the experiment, he observed the data upon his release, and he allowed reality to validate his defense.
It's brilliant. It demonstrates that when you are faced with a system that refuses to operate on logic,
Mm-hmm.
or a bureaucracy that is emotionally numb, sometimes your only defense is to elevate your argument to a level of structural reality that simply cannot be debated.
Because math and physics don't care about legal definitions or political rhetoric.
Exactly. A scale-free network operates the way it operates, regardless of what a prosecutor wants to believe.
And that is exactly why this specific deep dive matters so much for you, the listener, today. We live in a world drowning in information overload, where quick judgments, algorithmic assumptions, and massive systemic pressures are just the norm.
Yeah, that's just modern life.
Right. And Dr. Chen's approach shows us the immense practical value of thinking structurally.
It really does. When you are faced with an overwhelming, irrational, or unfair system, whether that's a bureaucracy at work, a confusing legal issue, or just the chaos of the internet, zooming out is your best defense.
Zooming out.
Yeah. If you can look at the physics of the network, the psychology of the people involved, and the underlying logic of the situation, you can separate yourself from the immediate emotional pressure.
You can analyze the mechanics of the forces acting against you rather than just reacting to them. Dr. Chen survived an unimaginable ordeal by turning his mind into an impenetrable fortress of logic. But diving into his bloodletter leaves you with something to really mull over long after this deep dive ends.
It raises some very uncomfortable questions about the future.
Right. Because if a society's legal and political system is structured in a way that treats the scientific method, objective truth, and natural human curiosity as a threat to public order, what happens to the future of innovation in that society?
It's a profound paradox. Innovation requires edge nodes, testing new ideas. It requires curiosity.
It requires microfluctuations.
Exactly. A system that tries to freeze itself to prevent any microfluctuation from occurring will ultimately stop producing the very energy it needs to survive.
Exactly. You can only prosecute the wind for so long.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you can't just point to an empty room and claim there's shattered glass. Eventually, people are going to realize there was never a window there to begin with.